Hi, and welcome to the Shane Plays review of Mordenkainen's Tome, the latest official book from the D&D 5e team. There's a couple other books announced. There's a heist at Waterdeep book coming, and then also a Undermountain adventure coming. But for right now, this is what's in our hands. It's been out for a few weeks now. This review is actually a little belated. I try to get the reviews out on new books quicker than this. However, this involves the notes of a certain cantankerous wizard named Mordenkainen, and as another famous cantankerous wizard once said,
"A wizard is never late, Frodo Baggins. Nor is he early. He arrives precisely when he means to."
So if it's good enough for Gandalf, I'm going to say it's good enough for Mordenkainen. So without any further ado, let's dig on in. First of all, this is the standard cover right there. Very good. I like this cover. I don't know. I like this cover. This is one of the rare instances where between the premium covers and the standard cover, I like the standard cover equally as well, although the premium cover is beautiful. And normally I would have gotten the premium cover, which is like a limited cover that only goes to certain game stores that are in a network with Wizards of the Coast. However, this time they had some issues and a lot of them had some damage. And I think Wizards is working on replacing them, but it just so happened that the store that I had worked through to get mine, every one they got was damaged. And I just said, well, just give me the normal cover because I like it anyway. I like that kind of multiversal clockwork of the multiverse, all the different planes, and Mordenkainen in the middle of it. And he's kind of, I don't know if you could tell, he's kind of looking at stuff, or stuff's looking at him. That's him. I don't know. It's just neat. So anyway, moving on. I think both the standard cover and the premium cover are really good. I went for the standard cover. If you can still get a premium cover, it's the same price, $49.95 as the standard cover. However, again, remember the premium covers are once they're gone, they're gone, and they may even be harder to get this time because they had that issue with the damage. So, looks aside, what did I think? Oh, and also let me mention that I do have all my notes written up for the Xanathar's Guide to Everything review. And talk about belated. This one's like 6 months or something belated. But I do have a review coming on this, as I've said in other videos. But anyway, so what did I think about Mordenkainen's and what is it? And let me read it. It says on the front, says, discover the truth about the great conflicts of the multiverse in this supplement for the world's greatest role-playing game. And, they always have that little blurb on all the 5th edition books on the front. It always says the world's greatest role-playing game. It always kind of reminds me of a Fantastic Four, it used to say, or may still do. I don't know. Marvel's about to start publishing it again. World's greatest comic magazine, which is both hyperbole and then in some people's opinions, probably the truth. So anyway, all right. Well, here's the thing though. What exactly is Mordenkainen's? Is that all it is? What I just read about a multiversal great conflicts of the multiverse. Well, that's part of it. But it's so much more than that. It is a lore book, that covers, among other topics, the eternal war between devils and demons, the enmity between dwarves and the underground duergar brethren, the battles between the Gith kinds, the Gith Yankee and the Gith Zerai. And then, it's got halfling lore, gnome lore, and it's all told from the perspective of that famous Greyhawk wizard turned multiversal tourist, Mordenkainen. And if you don't know, just a little bit of trivia, Mordenkainen was actually a character created back in the 70s by Gary Gygax himself, the co-creator of Dungeons & Dragons. And I think it can be argued that from a business perspective, he's the one that got it out there widely. Although we always have to give, Dave Arneson his due as well for, helping create the game. Dave and Gary together. But anyway, Mordenkainen is actually a character of Gary Gygax. He was game mastering or DMing. I don't even know what they called it at the time, dungeon mastering, and he wanted to step back and play a little bit and let somebody else DM. And he actually came up with Mordenkainen, and played Mordenkainen. And then, of course, there's a lot of spells in the various editions of D&D that are named after Mordenkainen, and like Mordenkainen and Bigsby. Is it Bixby? Bigsby's. There's some other named wizards and stuff from D&D history. A lot of those were either Gary or Gary's kids or people who were involved in the early beginnings of D&D. But I digress. Anyway, this book is also kind of half of a monster manual. Like a little over half of the book is actually monster stats. And if you'll remember, Volo's Guide to Monsters was the same way, where it was like half lore book and the other half of the book was basically a monster manual. Lots of monster stat blocks, creature stat blocks, etc. So if you have Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes and Volo's Guides to Monsters, you've basically got a second monster manual. There's that many monster stat blocks. I mean, in Mordenkainen's itself, I'll give the count in a second, but well over 100. I sit there and literally counted them up. But anyway, so you would have together with those two books, basically a monster manual 2, like they used to do in some of the previous editions. So that's pretty cool. Anyway, but let's get more into what Mordenkainen's actually is. And I want to mention that there's a companion blog post for this review at shaneplays.com. I'll try to remember to put a link in the video notes. If I don't, just go to shaneplays.com and look for Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. Right now, it'll be one of the top listings on the front page. However, that also has a image gallery with, I can't remember, a lot of images, some like close to 40 images from Mordenkainen's that you can take a look at. So even if you don't want to, basically read something very similar to what I'm going to say in this video, you can go check out the image gallery. So that's at shaneplays.com. But anyway, let's take a look at deeper into the tome and see what we have here. So by the numbers, it's $49.95. That's at, for the premium cover or the standard. You can, of course, order it off like Amazon or somewhere else cheaper. But remember, I always try to support my friendly local game store. If you have a nearby friendly local game store that you frequent, I would recommend buying it there because, they provide more than just product. They provide community. I've made friends at my game store. That's where I run my D&D game. They do more than just provide product, or at least they should. Now, if going in there and it's basically like going to Walmart, you don't get any personal service or build any relationships or anything, whatever. But I don't know of any friendly local game stores like that personally. All right, it's 256 pages, so it's $49.95, 256 pages, 6 chapters, which we'll get to here in a moment. There's 12 new playable sub-race options, which that'll excite some people. 4 new playable races for 5e. A lot of this stuff is new for 5e. Some of it is new to D&D in general. 140 monster stat blocks or, creature stat blocks, whatever. Not everything's a monster. That's a lot. I literally counted them up. I mean, that's a lot. 36 creatures. Now, I had the pleasure of talking to Jeremy Crawford and Kate Welch for my Shane Plays Geek Talk radio show and podcast a few weeks back before Mordenkainen's came out. And, they were saying that one of the things they wanted to do with Mordenkainen's was focus on higher level creatures, monsters, for higher level challenges. One, because there's not a lot of that out there for 5e. And I kind of speculated, can't remember if they confirmed this or not. I guess it doesn't matter that, 5e's been out long enough now that people are playing at higher levels. They've had that time to level up. And if I remember right, I think they said the average levels in D&D is like 6 or 7, maybe 7 through 10 or 7 through 9. That's the average level that people play at or get to in D&D. I thought that was kind of interesting. I don't remember the exact number, but it was something very similar to that. 1 astral dreadnought in a change of underwear not included, and that's actually not the highest CR creature in there. There's 36 creatures CR 15 or higher. That's the point that I was getting to with talking about the higher level creatures, and then an appendix. And the appendix is very helpful, where it's got it here. I don't know, how well you can see that. I'm trying not to bump the microphone, but it breaks it down. There's an appendix in the back. You get stat blocks by creature type, so aberrations, constructs, monstrosities, giants, fiends, humanoids, etc. Then you get stat blocks by challenge rating, which is very handy. Let's take a look here. There's actually talking about breaking down how many are above 15. For example, there's 4 creatures challenge CR 21. There's 3 creatures or stat blocks CR 20, 2 for CR 22, 1, 2, 3, 5 for CR 23, 2 for CR 24, 1 for CR 25, and 3, count them, 3 stat blocks for CR 26. That's pretty darn high. And those are all, of course, like demon lords or archfiends. You got Demogorgon, Orcus, and Zariel. Those are the CR 26 creatures. The Astral Dreadnought comes in at a paltry CR 21. Small fry. You got creatures by environment: Arctic, coastal, grassland, hill, mountain, etc. And then you have creatures by, let's see, this continues the swamp, urban, underwater, etc., etc. So that's nice. And one thing it doesn't have, which I keep griping about for 5e and RPG books in general that don't have this, if you make a reference book, I'd love to have it for like adventure books and campaign books and all that, like, Out of the Abyss or Tomb of Annihilation or whatever. But if you make a reference book, this is a reference book, $50 if I pay, retail price, which I do to support my local game stores, as I've already said. Well, actually, no, to be honest, I get a slight percentage because I run games there. But I would pay full price if I had to support my local game store. Anyway, digressing big time. Come back, Shane, out of the rabbit hole. The point is, this is a reference book. Give me an index. And none of these 5th edition books look fantastic. Every one of them has been amazing with the covers and the art and the interior design and layout and all that. Give me an index. This is not a PDF, okay? This is not an electronic document. This is not a Kindle book. This is not on D&D Beyond, where I can just Control F and search or have a search box or something like that. This is a hard copy print, $50 reference book. Give me an index. Okay, enough of that. I gripe about that on all these books. And that's, as you'll find out, that's going to be the only, if not one of the very few quibbles that I have with this book. I continue to be impressed by the 5th edition D&D books that they're putting out. So, especially like the presentation and how they put them together and all that stuff. Anyway, so the lore itself takes up over just under half of Mordenkainen's, with the rest of it, of course, being the monster stat blocks. And it spans a wide variety of subjects in the following chapters: the Blood War, elves, dwarves and duergar, Gith and their endless war, halflings and gnomes, and the bestiary, which of course the bestiary is the basically the half a monster manual that takes up a little over half of the book. So the Blood War, they talk about the basically the demons and the devils and their rivalry, their war that's been going on forever between the demons of the abyss and the devils of the 9 hills, or the 9 hells. Yeah, the 9 hells. Including major personalities involved, related cults. There's cults listed, and there's some demon and devil customization tables if you want to kind of customize things for your own campaign or whatever. Now, there's not playable demon or devil races. However, there are. They include 9 tiefling sub-races, one for each of the 9 devil lords, not demon lords, but devil lords. And the stat blocks in this book, in Mordenkainen's, for the demon lords, they're also an Out of the Abyss. But I think that's the only stat blocks that are reproduced from any other 5e material. I could be wrong. But the devil stuff is all new, and everything else is all new, like I said, for 5e, and in some cases for D&D in general. Now, the elves chapter, we get rich lore on surface elves, plus their cousins in the Underdark, the Drow, the Feywild, and the Shadowfell. So we, in this chapter on the elves, includes the topics include, but it's not limited to, their cosmic and their material history. By material, I mean their actual physical history on some sort of material plane, whichever one they're on. Their deities, religion, phases of aging, all the way from childhood up to elderhood, and their cultures and their outlook on life. It's pretty good stuff. So Mordenkainen introduces 3 new elf subraces. The Eladrin, which are from the Feywild, Sea Elves, and then the Shadar-kai. I think I'm Shadar-kai. I think I'm saying that right. Which they're native elves that are native to the Shadowfell, which is of course it's a plane of darkness and shadow. I think before 5e it represented something else, or in some recent edition the Shadowfell lore, the cosmology or whatever changed slightly, but just it's a dark place. I don't think that means everything there's evil, but anyway, all right. And I did want to touch on, the only reason I'm going to touch on this is because when it was first talked about, it was a subject of some discussion out there for people that were both pro and con on this, whether they had all the facts or not. I talked a little bit with Jeremy and Kate about it on the show that I mentioned earlier. But anyway, it did cause minor controversy when it was first announced. But I do want to say the Elven Blessing of Corellon that's in here is not heavy-handed in the way it's presented. Now, if you don't know that, that's basically it's a very few, I guess at the DM's discretion, either NPC or player character elves have the ability to, I guess, each day change their gender. And that's because Corellon, the god of elves that I guess that created elves, is kind of a very mutable type being. So that's where they're coming up with it and saying this is why this is. And it can lead to some interesting role-playing aspects. For example, and I think Jeremy used this example more than once. I read about it and we talked about it on the show. If you're a drow, and you can choose to be male or female, that's dangerous because into drow society, because it's so matriarchal. And if you can just decide I'm going to be a woman today, that could be a problem. So it could lead to some interesting role playing. But I do want to say that this does seem obvious that it's a supportive statement on gender issues, which is big in discussion in modern culture right now. Because and this is why I'm saying this, it's described as a miracle, right? Rather than an ability. Because, usually say, well, this is an ability. And the current D&D team has not been, bashful in its support of those issues. So, I'm just pointing that out. I'm only going there because a lot of people talked about it when it was first talked about on both sides. So I just want to, they're not super heavy handed about it or anything like that. Okay. So lots of cool stuff for elves. The dwarves and the duergar. So these short, stubborn, mountain delving addicted fellows and their underground gray brethren, the duergar. Okay, so here's some more information for them for 5e. A lot of this information may have already been presented in previous editions. Keep that in mind. So in this chapter, you'll find the deep roots of the war. See what they did there? They even call it like the roots of the war or something like that. Cultural and religious info on dwarves and duergar and their clannish society. It talks a lot about dwarven society and the clans and motivations of dwarves related to the clans. There's a nice little section on dwarves of the multiverse, like Greyhawk, Forgotten Realms, and Dragonlance. And it's interesting and somewhat odd that there isn't a similar section in the book for elves and gnomes, but there is for halflings. So I don't know if that was an editorial oversight or what, but I would have liked to have seen that for everything. And then it goes into duergar. There's a whole section set aside for them. They're described as a dark mirror of the dwarven clans. But they receive 5e love with rules on making duergar characters. And you got, the random tables and all that to help flesh out your either player character or NPC Grey Dwarf. So, all right, Gith and their endless war. So in addition to the Blood War chapter about the demons and devils and their big fight, and information on their society and cultures and all that. My guess is that this section will be either equally as favorite or a second favorite for why people want this book. Because the Gith Yankee and the Gith Zerai and all that have had kind of a hardcore fan base ever since they were introduced way back in 1981 in the first Fiend Folio. So they're extra planar races. They live on their own plane. Way back in their past, they kind of split into two different factions. If I understand, I think they're either the same biologically or very similar, but it's mainly philosophical reasons why they're different. The Gith Zerai and the Gith Yankee. But yeah, they split. And so now you've got, the Gith Zerai, the Gith Yankee on their own plane. They fight all the time, and sometimes they raid other planes. But this chapter gives history of the conflict, and you get cultural information on both factions of Gith. And then you get, for the first time in 5e, you get the Gith Yankee and the Gith Zerai as playable races. And of course, you get the random tables for names, personality traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws, and that sort of thing. Now, halflings and gnomes. So there's no dramatic or ongoing. Every chapter before this has, not only is it covered different races or societies, but it's also mentioned the conflict they're in. But the halflings and the gnomes don't have that. There's no ongoing conflict laid out because, by nature, they kind of lay low, and that's one of their survival tactics, not to draw attention, and not only whatever material plane they're in, but, it also keeps them under the radar of like all these multiversal threats and beings and things like that, because they're low key. So that's one of their survival tactics, whether they're aware of it or not. But Mordenkainen's also, because they don't have a conflict going on, but we still get some personality and cultural and religious information on both sub races. But I was thinking about, they're really short, right? They're not just medium; they're like small. So, since they're shorter than average, should there be sub races? Sorry. Okay. Anyway, so I digress again. Halflings also receive a Halflings of the Multiverse section, much like dwarves. So you get like Greyhawk, Forgotten Realms, Dragonlance. But also Dark Sun is mentioned. It talks about the Halflings of Dark Sun. So that's kind of interesting. And then you get guidance if you want to play a Deep Gnome, which is, like the Underdark or underground version of a gnome. You get that, including there's a new feat for Deep Gnomes. And you do get some, just in general, for whether it's a Deep Gnome or a Gnome or whatever, you get some random character creation or customization tables. So, and remember, there's all of these chapters have a lot of lore about the cultures, the religions, their outlook on life, maybe how they interact with other races, or even different factions within their own race. So there's a lot of lore here beyond just, player options. So keep that in mind. All right, so the bestiary. And that's the rest of this book is the bestiary, which makes up, like I said, a little over half of it. And it's got 140 monster stat blocks, as I said, I counted. So now, while not all of them are new to D&D in general, I do believe all of everything listed here is new to 5th edition, except for, as I mentioned before, I think the Demon Lords, who were listed in the Out of the Abyss campaign book, because they're like the major antagonists of the whole thing, is about dealing with them. So now, given the focus of Mordenkainen, remember, it's like this multiversal, extra planar, all these different mixes of things. The monsters listed here tend to be exotic at best, and downright brain twisting or diabolical, or both at worst. Now, you do have like some drow, some duergar, and some darrow. That's the more mundane listings, but there's plenty of aberrations and demons and devils and monstrosities and all that to wreak havoc on your peace of mind and your players. Now, I like having resources like this because, if you're a DM that's been around for a little while, and especially if your players are veteran players of D&D, especially coming from multiple previous editions, you drop a monster on them, and there's a good chance they're very familiar with that monster. They know its strength, its weaknesses, and that sort of stuff. So even if they're not trying actively to metagame, it's hard not to metagame, right? Because you know, and even good players can struggle with, or not good players that try not to metagame can still, fall into, well, I know that blunt weapons won't work on this, or, lightning won't do it, that kind of, like the black pudding, don't hit it with lightning because it'll split, right? That's just in players' brains. So anyway, I like that with unusual monsters like these, even maybe some that have been done in previous editions, the chances these aren't core monster manual stat blocks, the chances of them being, familiar enough to know off the top of their head how to deal with it is, lessened. And that I like that a lot. I like it. It's a chance of truly surprising them, truly challenging them, and they get this sense of, kind of unsettling. What is this thing? What the heck is this thing? And do we stand or do we run? What do we do? I really like that a lot. So, now, as I said before, when I talked with Jeremy Crawford and Kate Welch, that, they said they wanted to make sure to provide higher CR monsters. I already went through, those stat blocks. And like I said, that's not idle talk or empty talk. They really did give DMs and players a lot of higher level creatures to encounter and get killed by and that sort of thing. So, tell your parties if you're going to use this stuff to bring their A game and pack a lunch, because a lot of these baddies are not going down easy. And as I mentioned, the book does give that very helpful appendix at the back that has, that breaks down. It's very easy to sort the creatures and to find the creatures and that sort of thing. Now, I complained earlier, getting into final thoughts, about lack of an index. Now, at the beginning in the table of contents, there is an index of monster stat blocks, alphabetical. That's fine, but man, I've already got all that in the back. Listing all the different monsters sorted a million different ways. This is helpful, don't get me wrong, but again, one of the few dings I'm going to give to this book is, I want an index, and that's not specific to this book. It's, the D&D products in general right now, especially the reference books. So, I do want to say this is, it's a nice book, both in presentation and in usefulness. Now, you'll hear me say when I finally get my review out on Xanathar's Guide to Everything, I mean, that book is like super useful to DMs and players right out the gate. There's so much cool stuff you can do in it. It's kind of like the Unearthed Arcana of 5th edition. Now, Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes is useful and cool, but it's not essential. You don't have to have it. It's not core, like, oh, if I don't have this book, I can't have a good D&D experience or anything like that. But it's very well done, and I think it's especially useful to DMs and groups that are looking to add something diabolical or exotic to their games. But there, like I said, there's enough lore on more mundane subjects to have it apply to any group. But if you're wanting something a little different, a little crazy, a little wacky in your game, then this is going to be a good book for you. So I do want to say this is kind of a risky release on the behalf of the D&D team, because it could have come off, it defies easy categorization, because what is it? Is it a lore book? Is it a monster manual? Is it about demons? Is it about halflings? What is this book? And it's all of that. So it could have come off, very confusing and unfocused, but I do think the risk paid off, and Mordenkainen's, it covers a lot of ground in a well-defined way, while being both a lore resource and monster manual light, all in one package. And although I buy each new D&D release for review purposes and to support my friendly local game store, I could probably try to bag a free copy of something, say, how, promote your store or whatever. But I try to, I try to help my local game store, like I said. But even though I would have bought it anyway for review purposes, I'm glad to have this book, in my box of tools. So, now, Like with other D&D 5e books, as I've already said, Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes looks great from the cover to the interior art, both the standard cover and the premium cover, and the overall layout and design. So whatever D&D, and we talked about it a little bit on my show, they mentioned some of the people involved in the design, whoever they have, to keep that team together. Don't mess around with it. Let those chefs stay in the kitchen because they're doing a great job. The books look fantastic. I've already talked about the index, so I'm not going to go back there. And then, should you buy, finally, kind of wrapping up, should you buy Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes? And what I always do, or at least almost always do with this kind of thing is, because there's different types of players, there's different types of DMs. Even within the fairly closed system of D&D, there's different types of players and needs and all that stuff. Plus, any given DM or any given group could be of different experience or levels or how long they play D&D. Like this might be fresh to them, or other groups may have already done stuff like this in other editions or even in this edition with homebrew. Who knows? And because the subject, the book itself is a subject that different people and groups will react differently to. So I tend not to give an up or down, recommendation. For me personally, yeah, absolutely. I this is a good book, and I'm glad I bought it. But also, and I mentioned this before, I do want to point out this is not a core rule book, and it's not required to play D&D. The only books like that at this time, and for many editions of D&D, I don't know if it'll ever change in the future, are the Player's Handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide. You could argue, and I think D&D would say, and most people would say, that the Monster Manual is a core rule book. Yes and no. I mean, it'd be kind of weird to play without it, but really the rules you really need really are in the Player's Handbook. But so we'll say Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, and then 90% Monster's Manual. Okay, that's what you really need in case you've never played D&D before. All right. So with that said, here's my spectrum of recommendations. If you're hungry for more lore in general to enrich your D&D 5e experience, Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes is absolutely for you. If you are particularly interested in one or more of the lore sections, demons, devils, elves, dwarves, gith, halflings, gnomes, duergar, etc., this book could very well be for you, but keep in mind that it's not dedicated to just one subject. So although the chapters, each section of lore is fairly in depth and comprehensive, it's still limited to one chapter for that category of lore, right? The dwarves and the duergar only get one chapter. The halflings and gnomes, one chapter. The demons and devils, one chapter, covering both, right? The gith, one chapter. So just, elves, one chapter. So, just keep that in mind. But those chapters are good. So depending on your individual desires or needs or whatever, it could be like going to the store and you find this, package, blister pack, if you will. There's 3 action figure things in there, but you only want Iron Man. But you got to buy all 3 to get the Iron Man. So it's up to you. Or maybe you want Black Widow and Iron Man. Or maybe you want Avengers Tower and Black Widow. You understand what I'm saying? So the point is that I can't make that call for somebody else. If like I really want the Blood War, but I don't care about the rest of it. I don't know. It's up to you, right? It's hard for me to say on that. So depending on your individual wants, you'll have to make that decision. And the point I'm trying to make is that there's a buffet of stuff in here. And some of it is, quite different content from the other. All right, so if you want more Sword Coast and or Forgotten Realms lore, Mordenkainen's probably is not for you. Although many of the subjects, races, and monsters can be encountered in or are an essential part of Faerun, this is a multiversal source book that applies to many settings and planes of existence. So it's not like the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide or something like that. If you want more official, yet unusual monster stat blocks to surprise and challenge your players with, or to study voraciously if you're a player. I know you players out there. I know there's those of you out there that'll just study this stuff like crazy and love it. Mordenkainen's Tome is absolutely for you. If you want more regular monsters that fit in well with a generic high fantasy D&D settings or the current default of Forgotten Realms, etc., this might not be the book for you. The stat blocks are cool, yet as already mentioned, they lean towards the diabolical and or exotic, and just plain strange, not to mention, in many cases, higher level. So just keep that in mind. And then finally, if you're a completionist who makes sure to get a copy of every official D&D book release, then great googly mooglies, what do you need my review for? Go get your copy if you haven't already. So anyway, that's my review on Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for watching. Appreciate your support of Shane Plays, especially if you're a regular viewer. And remember, go to shaneplays.com. The link should be in the video notes, and check out the image gallery that we put, or that I put on the review on the blog version. So anyway, thanks again, and we will catch you next time on Shane Plays.